I was from 2005 to 2007 the official in the Cabinet Office responsible for the funding of our intelligence agencies, our counter-terrorism strategy until that function was transferred to the Office for Security and Counter-Terrorism. I was also the chairman of the Joint Intelligence Committee. I was responsible for resilience. And previously, I was, for a period, Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Defence, and I have a long track record in relation to defence. I am amongst the jobs I have now, is I am the chairman of the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory, which is an agency of the Ministry of Defence. For clarity, I'm not appearing on their behalf or using information that they have supplied me.
What's resilience?
Well, resilience is essentially another word for civil protection, and some of what we're going to come on and talk about.
Sorry, I'm sorry, the acoustics are not good.
I'm so sorry.
Is another word for?
For civil protection, civil emergency planning, in its broadest sense.
Yeah.
In its broadest sense, actually. So it's for how you would. We'll come on. We can no doubt you'll come onto this, but it's the whole set of issues around how you protect infrastructure, how you prepare against risk, and so on. When you look at what are now the sort of tier one, the highest priority things which the UK government is thinking about in national security terms, you get right at the top of the list: counter-terrorism, cyber-security, disasters of various kinds, alongside international risks. In the UK, these issues sort of didn't begin this year, and when they've been under consideration for quite a long time. Ultimately, these issues around cyber are not issues, as is often thought, around sort of technology and in a narrow sense. They're much deeper and more difficult issues around how our society is already being transformed by the impact of growing information and communications revolution that we've faced, and how individuals interact with all of that, and what that will imply to how society is organised in the future. And that is obviously a set of softer issues, much more complicated, which I don't think any country has yet got its mind around. In the context of some of the ways in which issues around national security are being rethought, I've become increasingly attracted to the importance of doctrine, by which I mean exactly what you're talking about, that we need to have a shared understanding of the nature of the problem, its dimensions, and in the case of cybersecurity, which institutions are going to be responsible for what, which is a very difficult set of issues because of the breadth of the potential label you can attach to this problem. So we absolutely need that, and then we need a shared language that is based on a language, so it's not like NATO speak, for example. The prior question, which is, do we all understand what it is we're talking about?
And often we don't.
And often we don't. And do we have sufficient mutual trust to engage? And often we don't. And then, if you can create both those things, yeah, you have an institution. But I wouldn't create another one.
Do you have confidence in the systems we have at the moment in terms of the relationships that need to be in place to deal with this ball game that is now in play?
Well, I think the answer to that is, well, we know. Yeah. Do people understand the risk, the threat? Answer, not really, I think. And that would relate both to cybercrime and to activities of state and quasi-state bodies. And then, is there a big issue around vulnerability to insiders? To which the answer to that is yes. So, if you put all that together, I wouldn't have a great deal of confidence.
What you're telling us that really you don't have confidence in those systems, really?
I wouldn't have generalised confidence in those systems. No, there's a danger in issues like this that we talk as though they've just struck us, and my goodness, why haven't we thought about them before? And the answer is, there's been a lot. I mean, I spent a lot of my life in government thinking about these security issues, and in my last job, through various fora, I was, and my colleagues were talking a lot to industry in this country, and we have a very well-developed framework for giving out security advice to other sectors in this country, for example. All those things can no doubt be improved, but we're not starting from a zero base. All these points I'm acutely conscious you all, you know, they are rather obvious.
I'm very intrigued that you've distinguished quite firmly, it seems to me, between cybercrime and the state security side of things. I'm fascinated by the degree to which it's really possible any longer, in important respects, to distinguish.
Well, I don't think it is possible to. I don't think it is possible to say there is a sharp distinction in the sense that both in terms of issues around technology and in terms of the sort of people who might engage in the activity, they might do it for all sorts of purposes.
The reality is that we're dealing with a globalised phenomenon.
Yeah. This is one of those cases where, there are global issues, but the sophistication of societies and the risks vary actually in different places, etc. The point that one needs to get one's mind around, obviously, is not that this could be dealt with by nation states individually, because quite clearly it can't. They need both to be taking appropriate action to protect the various things which they're responsible, and they need to be trying to create international regimes.
We're getting into sort of territory now which relate to the Foreign Secretary's initiative that he took 10 days ago at Munich, and his announcement that the government was going to bring together some of the main players later this year.
I think fundamentally the whole culture in which we're living is changing, and transforming is the word you use, because I think that's true.
Yeah.
Is the present silo cultures of government in this country and clearly in Europe capable of giving us the kind of security we now need? Or do we need to really move far more seriously into whole systems thinking? I mean, what's your view on that? I mean, you've had a field for it for a long time.
We have perhaps over-focused on the technical side and under-focused thus far on the sort of social science, behavioural dimension of all of this.
Is government fit for purpose here and in Europe for this world which you have described quite rightly, I think, which is transforming our communities and human behaviour?
Well, there'll be a fundamental issue that people might not grasp, but quite the deep implications of what's happening. I would say, so individual members of communities we have to focus on, and how they're communicated with. I think it's quite interesting that the communication touches on this, but doesn't really play it up, which is quite surprising, given that I think I don't have the figures in my head, but the EU research budgets are very considerable amounts of money. So you might have expected that.
And they're considering a new one now.
Yeah, exactly.
Program.
Yeah, exactly. So you might have expected, I think, that more would have been made of that dimension as part of the EU as a whole's contribution to this problem. Thinking about these problems as essentially being science and technology narrowly, as it's usually understood, problems, that is, around physics, etc., maths, the traditional way of thinking about them, and to recognise that in a number of important ways they are very deeply embedded issues in society where we need to understand what will drive behaviour, and therefore, and this is certainly what we're trying to do in the bits of the UK area which I have an involvement, to try and broaden out the way in which we think about these problems. So to ensure there's a proper social science dimension to nearly all of the thinking about these issues has been a big priority over the recent past and will be a priority for the future, I think.
Is a cyber attack by one state on another, does that amount, do you think, to an act of war, given your background in
Could cyber attack constitute an act of war? Absolutely. And if you could establish who'd done it, of course, etc. The EU is a convenient forum to spread information of a valuable kind, to raise awareness in countries that might not realise that the problem is quite what it is.
the ideologies which are driving terrorism today, whether it be homegrown or emanating from some foreign country, are all the same, are all based on the same set of ideas, then surely the more multinational the examination of the ideologies, the more likely we are to arrive at solutions that will apply across the board. So is there not room at the EU level for this counter-radicalisation ideology, counter-radicalisation anti-ideology to be developed on a European basis?
Well, I think the way in which we seek to tackle the challenge, if we're talking about the challenge from Islamist, so-called Islamist terrorism, as opposed to other forms of terrorism we might be more concerned about, which are much more local or regional, there is probably value in thinking about how that is tackled at the EU level, but ultimately a much wider group of countries have an interest in this, and actually agreeing amongst that wider group of countries a strategy which is the right strategy is the much bigger prize, really. I personally do not think that the way to tackle this problem is to wrap it all up as a single problem and to try and find a single solution to it. The way to tackle it is actually to break it down, disaggregate it, focus on how in individual countries, in the individual circumstances they face, we can best tackle it, and play it down as this vast, overwhelming single problem. I think what I'm saying is, what I'm trying to say is it's sort of horses for courses.
There are a number of proposals in the strategy to make it easier to seize, freeze, manage and confiscate criminal assets, including revision of the money laundering directive and increasing the powers of the asset recovery officers.
With all your vast experience, do you have any anxieties about the impact of the internal security strategy on the freedoms and fundamental rights that make our society worth protecting? How do we achieve the integration of the protection of those rights with effective action on this front?
I can't say that when I read the various things that the Commission were proposing that I thought that they were a fundamental challenge to our human rights as citizens. But again, in a way, it's rather like the point we just made. It all depends, doesn't it? It all depends.
If you take, for example, academic freedom as an absolutely essential essential element in a free, open society worth living in.
Yeah.
As all this moves forward, isn't there a danger of a chilling effect on honest communication about original challenging thought?
Why? If I could ask a question.
Well, let me be specific.
Yeah.
I can think of a university in which I'm involved,
Yeah.
in which I've seen an internal memo, which reminded researchers and others of the context in which they're operating and the need to take this seriously.
Well, the terrorist risk inside universities. Yeah. Well, what can I usefully say? No, obviously there are a number of trade-offs here. So, for example, there are already serious constraints on who can be engaged in certain sorts of research in universities because of the risk that the knowledge that will be generated will head elsewhere in ways which would be fundamentally damaging. So there isn't an absolute right for a university to conduct research in, say, a particular area and to conduct it with whoever it wishes to employ as a researcher, etc. So there are obviously trade-offs here. Now, I think that in relation to the trade-off you're talking about, there is a very serious issue around academic freedom, debate, all those sort of things, alongside the fact that it's quite clear that a number of younger people in universities have been radicalised in ways which present a real risk.
Now, one doesn't dispute this is a balance, but I'm just asking whether you don't feel there is an issue here and we need to keep it constantly in mind.
Yes, there is an issue here and we do need to keep it constantly in mind.
I found your evidence very useful indeed. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. It's very kind of you.